Thank you, Rotarians, for having me in to share some thoughts about a topic. First, I'll just tell you a little bit about who I am, what I'm doing here, and we'll go from there. So my name is Chandra Herbert. I'm the member of the legislature for Vancouver. Totally crazy things to say, but you're in the thick of it. You've got your team, you're supporting your team, and all those people on the other side, the worst things ever. You leave the room and then you're having coffee together, and it's as if nothing happened. But we see it, and I see school groups come to the legislature and they watch this kind of thing and they go, I'm not allowed to shout at my teacher in my classroom. How are you allowed to shout at the premier? Or how is the minister allowed to shout at that man over there or the woman over there? And it just doesn't, to me, it's not the kind of world I want to live in. I was told you should try and model your best behavior. So here's me during question period, reading my notes or working on a bill or something like that, while everybody else is shouting at each other. It's kind of weird, and I get some looks, and people wonder why don't I participate in the same way as my team. And I just think that we've got to be bigger than that. I may not have the right solution, and maybe it is better to shout at each other and do that kind of thing, let off a little steam, as some people argue. But for me, if your argument is strong, it should be enough, as opposed to with all the desk pounding and shouting and trying to push the other side down. But such it is so far in our legislature. I've certainly been working with the speaker to try and raise the tone if we can, because I think the risk is if you model that behavior there, you model it everywhere. You go to a public hearing, anybody in the development or real estate industry, if you're going to City Hall and there's a proposal, maybe you've seen a proposal come before you, you go to City Hall, people shouting back and forward, again, not going too far. So what do we do about it? How do we try and build a more cohesive society? How do we try and get us back into, I wasn't alive then, but I'm told that, we used to be able to have more generous discussions. Maybe not. Maybe that's just looking in the rearview mirror. I think we've got to start treating each other better, and that means that right now we have a situation where we have folks in our society who feel they have no chance ever to get ahead. So a couple of actions that I championed while we were in government to make it easier for folks to achieve their full potential, like eliminating tuition fees for adult basic education, making sure that people who want to upgrade their skills so they can get into the workforce, maybe they've been raising a kid, maybe they're a new immigrant, maybe they were a high school dropout, had challenges with addiction issues, and now they've managed to find their feet again. We need to be creating that ladder of opportunity. And unfortunately, for quite a while in this province, there have been a number of doors closed to folks in those positions. The challenge of English as second language. A lot of these folks, very great skills, but English as a second language, if they're raising a family on a minimum wage, they're not able to get that skills trained. We need to make sure that they can upgrade those skills as well. The government is a parent to thousands of children, foster children, children in the care of the state. Up until recently, the government, I would argue, was a negligent parent in many ways. Many of us, I started my RESP for my son. He's 1.5 years now, and I'm able to because I have resources to do that. But the government never did that for the kids in their own care. So kids would hit 18 or 19, age out of care. Oh, well, I want to go to college. Oh, well, there's no money for you. You're moving out of this foster care home. If the foster family was able to do that, that was great. There was no plans on behalf of the provincial government to really make the chance of success greater for these kids that were in our own care. The government recently, finally, through leadership of a number of colleges and universities and the foster kids themselves, has made it so university, college, trades training is free for these kids to attend. Of course, there's going to be other costs of living costs and some of those things that have to be raised money to help them. But the number of kids that are taking up this opportunity now, it's way more, it's in the hundreds. It's much, much higher than people ever imagined it would be. Because a lot of people had written these kids off. They had not looked at them as those with a great chance of success. And so then they weren't provided with a chance to success, a ladder of opportunity. So those are two areas that I think we're seeing a difference. Another area, of course, BC never had a poverty reduction strategy. We had a jobs plan, and I think jobs, of course, are one of the greatest ways that you can get out of poverty and you can change that. But as we know, a lot of people, I think about 25% of people who are homeless right now, they say have jobs. You know, they're couch surfing. You don't necessarily see them on the street the same way you see other homeless folks, but they do have jobs. So a job is part of it, but you need to wrap around a strategy of housing supports as well to get there. You know, we've got a number of social housing projects in the West End where I would go and meet people in the places. You know, what's your story? How did you end up here? And time again, I would hear stories of, well, you know, I had a bad break, something happened in my life, my parents died, or I got injured in a job accident, got addicted to, you know, opioids or some of those things, ended up homeless, life spiraled down because you can't really get a good life once you're homeless. It's really difficult to get back up off that problem, that area. But in many cases, we've managed to find people, connect them to housing, and that's a start. So this 2,000 modular housing units you probably heard about, that's another opportunity, I think, to build that kind of community where you go, well, you want a better life, let's find a way to get you into housing so that person in Cole Harbour isn't stepping over you. You can get into housing, and we can get you addiction, mental health support if you need it, or other kinds of supports to help you get there. Obviously, you yourself have to want to make a better life too, but we also, you know, I had a church pastor say to me, well, why do you care so much about this? I didn't know he was a church pastor at the time, right? He seemed very conservative, very business-like, and I said, well, you know, financially, it makes more sense to help the homeless than leaving them homeless, because the legal costs, healthcare costs, social service costs, quality of life costs for everybody is so much higher. I said, geez, that's a really cold-hearted way of thinking about it. And I said, well, you know, I would just tell you because I don't want to see people homeless. Like, it just hurts my heart when I see that. But even if you don't have a heart, financially, I think it makes sense as well. And then he revealed himself to be a church pastor. Okay, so we were just trying to test my own spirit, my own soul. You know, why am I doing this? Anyways, it's interesting work being an MLA. Now, in terms of another thing that I think the government's done, and we're seeing this municipally as well, and for good and for poor, is banning big money in politics. We were able in the past to rely on big corporate, big union donations to elect governments. And the big political parties in BC, the NDP, the Liberal Party, receive large donations from people to run their campaigns. I campaigned since I first was elected, since before I was elected, to try to end that practice. I think government should be very clearly by the citizens, for the citizens, of the citizens, with no question of who they're answering to. Now it means that we have less money to spend, but I think that's a good thing. I think municipally, we've done that as well. And interestingly, it's created a situation where there's less money going around, but there's way more candidates running. So if you're in Vancouver, I'm sorry, look at that ballot. My goodness, it's going to be hard, but you can start voting on Wednesday because there are so many people listed. You have to create your own cheat sheet to go through it. But anyone running here? Should I acknowledge anybody? No. Sorry. Lately, it doesn't matter what event I go to, I run into a candidate for something. All wanting me to acknowledge them and bring them on the front of the stage. But banning big money is a part of it. I think the other thing that I would argue, and it may be controversial, that I think we need to do is I think we need to change the electoral system. Right now, we've got a system called first past the post. And the reason I'd argue we should give proportional representation a try is because I think it would get more cooperation amongst MLAs, and we would have to be working together more often to get things done. We wouldn't always get exactly what we want as parties necessarily, but I think negotiation is a good thing. I don't think a party that gets 40% of the vote should get 100% of the power. And for me, that's the same, whether it be a New Democrat government, a Liberal government, Conservative, whatever. You know, I sat through 9 years of a government elected with 43% of the vote. My party got 40% of the vote, yet in terms of the actual decisions, we had almost none of the power to make any sort of decision, though the 43% did. And that works really well if you support the 43%, but if you're on the other side, it doesn't look so good. And so I'd rather we actually be forced, as they've done in New Zealand, to try and negotiate with other parties to come up with a solution of what's best for the government. Right now, the NDP Green coalition, it's not a coalition, but we'll call it that. Between the two parties, we represent the folks that 57% of the people that voted. So in a sense, we're operating kind of as it would look under proportional anyways. We've been forced to try and negotiate, and I think you're getting better government. I would say that if New Democrats won a majority or if Liberals win a majority, you do end up sometimes with absolute power, things as you know, the phrase goes, and you lose your humility. You know, if you don't have that check of having to go, well, I have to negotiate on an issue by issue basis, you can start thinking that you know everything, that you have 100% of the solutions. So I'd much rather we try proportional representation, which we will also be getting a ballot to vote on that soon. But I'm not somebody to tell people what to do, so I just urge you to consider it and look at the resources that are out there to answer questions. The other thing I like about New Zealand's approach, which we're trying to follow, is they gave electors the chance to try out proportional representation, which means that you vote for the party that you want and the local representative, and then that vote matches how much percent wanted that party, that's how many seats they get. In New Zealand, they said 2 elections down the road, we'll have another referendum to ask the public, do you want to keep the new system or do you want to go back to the old one? So it's kind of the, you know, in sales, it would be like, well, you know, we'll give you a money back guarantee in some ways because you would actually have the chance to return to the old system. In New Zealand, they gave voters that chance, and the voters, by a large majority, said, no, let's keep the proportional system. We prefer that because we have a greater diversity of views having to work together as opposed to absolute power for one group that just manages to, in Quebec's case, Quebec's recent election, they won something like 34% of the vote, yet they're the government, and the 64% or 56% who didn't are in opposition. That to me doesn't make a lot of sense. A two-party system, first part past the post might work, but we don't have that anymore in our provinces. We have multiple parties, multiple views, and I think we need to find a way to get them working better together. That also includes things like committees, getting committees of the legislature to work together. Your joke about Uber at the beginning reminded me I sat on a committee of all parties trying to negotiate what would be the best way to bring ride-hailing, ride-sharing to Vancouver. Produced a report, it says very clearly what we need to do. All parties agreed on it. And it's that kind of thing I think we should expect more of our legislators to do, as opposed to play the cheap games of, you know, I won, you lost, and now I'm going to tell you about how horrible you are, and on it goes. So I don't want to go on too long because I've learned that in politics, the longer you're elected, the longer you talk. And I've been elected for 10 years, but it's not often that politicians or elected leaders get the same opportunity in between elections to answer questions from people or take suggestions as they do in elections. You're seeing 1,000,001 all candidates debates right now for the local elections, but in many cases, that would be the only chance you'll ever see them, unless you go to a council meeting or something like that once they're elected. Something I do in my constituency, and you might see me out later this week, I set up a table on the street corner with a little banner wrapped around it, Spencer's Mobile Office, which in the West End is kind of funny because you can walk everywhere anyway, so you can walk to my office, it's right there on Denman Street, but I like to set up the table up at Butte and Davie or over on Robson Street or wherever, just so that the constituents that I run to represent, regardless of affiliation, have a chance to come talk to me, have a chance to say, well, what about this, what about that? And sometimes I'll just share one small story about one of those days of what you can find. I had a guy come up to me and say, Spencer, you care about these renters and housing issues. I got a real problem with my neighbor. I said, well, you talk to your landlord, you know, what am I as an MLA supposed to do about this? You know, oh, my neighbor's so loud, I can't sleep at night, he snores, he snores, he snores. It's so incredibly loud. And so eventually it gets so bad I have to bang on the wall to wake him up so I can fall asleep before he starts snoring again. Oh, okay, well, that's a tough one. Maybe you need a white noise machine, maybe you need earplugs. I don't know, I'm your legislator, I can't pass a law saying you can't snore. Well, maybe I'll try that, I don't know. And then I kid you not, this guy was on the street. The next day, a guy came to my office and he said, you know, it's just horrible. So you didn't confuse it. So the guy was complaining about his snoring. The next day, the guy comes in and he goes, I can't sleep. My neighbor, for some reason, in the middle of the night, just starts pounding on my wall. He just bangs away, and it wakes me up every time. What address? Where do you live? Where do you live? And I said, well, do you snore? Yeah, I've heard that. I don't have anyone living with me right now. Well, that might be why. So I said, well, maybe you might have sleep apnea. You might need a breathe right strip. You know, go get it checked out. And sure enough, I guess the guys, whatever happened, I heard from them both later. I don't know what you did, but you solved the problem. Okay, so being an MLA is sometimes about laws and about changing policy. Sometimes it's dealing with snoring problems in your constituents. But I wouldn't have known about these issues. They wouldn't have had a chance for me to help them if I hadn't been out on the street. Now, maybe they would have solved it on their own, or maybe one of them would have ended up evicted because of continually banging on the neighbor's door. I'm not sure, but I guess just saying that in politics, there can be really small issues, there can be really large issues, but they're all human issues. And so as a way to finish up my plea for civility and my plea to reach beyond, to reach, as they say in the States, reach across the aisle, or listen to, look for the best in each other, is that as much as you're able, I'd urge you to try and put yourself in the other person's shoes, to realize that no party has the best 100% of the ideas, and that there's no magic bullet to most of these issues. There's just hard work and community. And so thank you for doing your bit to build community and to solve these issues that you can see and that you can solve in a collective way. My office is down in Denman, but I'm reachable by phone, Twitter, Facebook, fax machine if you still use it, email, letter, carrier pigeon, really, I try my best to help everybody in the constituency, regardless of party. And, I would say my party is the West End and Cole Harbour first, and then I'm a proud New Democrat MLA as well. And I think the government and Premier John Herbert are doing a good job, but there's so much more to do to make change in the province. And sorry for intruding on your lunch with politics, but I really appreciate the chance to be here. Now, I do have time, I believe, for a few questions, if that's all right, Brian? Sure. Thank you.
This was a good joke. I'm just going to thank Spencer first before we let him take, I'm sure there'll be many questions. But first, the way we thank our speakers at Rotary is by giving money to the to end the polio. And we're getting very close, and we expect within the next few years we should be able to announce that it's completely finished. It should be great. And it was nice that you referenced that too. It's always nice when you hear speakers have read up on Rotary. So
it'd be hard to miss that one.
All right, let's open the floor first, Spencer, for questions.
Sure. Okay. I'll hold the mic because I know it's very heavy. Well, your stated position with regard to the way you handle it is refreshing and laudable, with the exception of electoral reform. You have not touched on probably the most egregious thing to hit this city in a long time, and that is a tax on wealth, particularly people who are retired, fixed income, live in a house that has rocketed in value that they had nothing to do with. There's nothing to do with income, and you're bringing in, or supposedly bringing in, a tax on wealth. That is really dangerous and really bad policy.
Do you mean the speculation tax, or
the so-called education tax?
Okay, yeah, so the question of the education tax, it's called the education tax because the Social Credit Party called it the education tax many, many, many years ago. The PST technically is called the Social Services Tax, because that's what it was named many, many years ago. So the government didn't name it that. And in fact, actually, there's more money going into education in Vancouver than that tax raises. So in terms of where that tax money goes, there's more money going into education than the tax raises. So you might not like the name of it, but in fact, beyond that, it does. Now, in terms of the question around, I'm just trying to understand the question. It was to talk about the speculation tax, to talk about why we're doing that, or seniors deferrals on.
My question was not about a speculation tax. My question was about people living in a house that is now going to be taxed that they had nothing to do with and maybe not the income to pay for, with the exception of maybe having to sell the house.
It's the school tax.
Yes, that's
Property tax.
Property tax.
yeah, which that extra the $1.4 million.
Taking a $3 million home and levying a massive tax on it.
And I'm sorry I didn't reference it. It's not something constituents have been bringing up with me, at least in my community. It's probably a bigger issue where people have those homes. So I would have raised it if it had been something that they raised. But I think the government's argument has been that there is the chance to defer taxes, and many people have done that. And in fact, are actually investing the money that they're saving on deferring taxes into mutual funds and making even more money than they would be paying in interest. Now, that's been the argument. It was the argument under the former government as well. And they've been increasing the exemptions up to, I believe it's 1.4 million. But at this point, if you have a bit more, the argument is that we need a bit more help to help those who have a bit less. And I know that's not the most popular with some folks, but that's the belief of the government, is that if we're going to address homelessness and the poverty crisis that we've got in this province, we have to find resources. And I think in this case, we've got some of the lowest property taxes in North America right now, even for properties worth over $3 million.
Okay, and Jen.
I'll do this according to the rules. I live in Kitsilano, and we're actually in a fight with the city over their stupid tax. But I know that's not your jurisdiction. I know David Eby, he's the MLA, and I know him as a law professor, and I would be surprised if any of his law students tried to present as a legal contract the proposed system of voting on the not first past post, but on the other, without giving a detailed proportional representation, explaining exactly who you vote for, whether they're going to represent your riding. We all know we vote in our riding, and some of the ridings have wealthier houses than others. That's part of the point that Paul's making. But we should have a clear deal of saying, okay, you've got plan A or plan B, not, well, we may have A, B, C, D, but
Thanks. I think I would love to be able to have a map that you could look at and get a very clear picture. I think the three options that are being presented in terms of if you want to vote proportional, these are the three systems that you can choose from. One of them, mixed member proportional, is one that I favor. It would probably follow along with your federal riding boundaries, where you vote for a local elector in your federal riding boundary, and then you would vote for the party. Say you wanted to support, maybe you wanted to support the Liberal Party, but you liked your local MLA, and they might be your Democrat or whatever, but that would give you that option. I get that there's a desire for more information. I think we only have to look around the globe where the vast majority of countries use proportional representation to get a sense of where it works. I don't understand the fear campaign that's being waged against proportional representation as if it would destroy everything when the vast majority of the world uses it. I think we look at whether it be New Zealand, Germany, what have you, some of the most successful economies in the world use proportional representation. But do we want more detail? We always want more detail. That was the argument people made around STV as well. And how would it work? Well, we couldn't understand it unless we did it, is another of the arguments. Is you're doing it, you're understanding it, you're living it. You can't fully understand it until you lived it.
Spencer, sorry, we've got a couple more questions. And just briefly, like I've been listening to the NW people speaking about it with their guests on the proportional representation referenda, etc. And I'm not the brightest guy in the room, but I know a little bit about politics. And when I listen to it, it makes no sense to me. So why wouldn't they just make it very simple? Proportional representation, you go out and vote for the party you believe in, then that party leader will take so many proportionately, and they go to the legislature. It's all over, it's simple. But they got this convoluted, difficult thing. But now for a really simple question.
No, I just thought you could group your answers. First of all, your presentation was excellent, and I enjoyed it. And quite frankly, if I hadn't lived in a dozen different countries around the world, I would be totally impressed by your presentation on the new proposed way of voting. The fact is, in a wonderfully reasonable little country like New Zealand, I gather it works very well. You just mentioned Germany, where I lived. Also the UK, and I've been all over Europe as well, and the rest of the world. Now, when you have proportional representation, yeah, there are some good aspects to it, but the reality is, it means that parties on the far left and parties on the far right can gain the power to totally determine the agenda of the country. And that's rather dangerous. You mentioned Germany. Their latest election, things have been in suspense for at least a year as they tried to find a partner who would govern with the current government. Not easy. So you can speak about the defects. Second defect of this idea of having individual members and then a list is that party hacks can be put on the list, people with no particular political skills, and they will find themselves in the legislature along with people like you, who obviously are a great politician. So just everyone think the perfect system doesn't exist. The one we have now is imperfect, but our country has remained stable for some years. The alternatives, yes, some aspects might be good, but the fact is you can bring about terrible instability. Personally, I'm not ready to risk it.
Thank you. President Churchill said democracy was the worst system except for all the rest. You know, but you're right. Any system can have challenges, and totally get that. But yeah, you're right. Maybe I should group some so we get more chances to ask.
Couple more questions. It wasn't like
Should I call you
presentation.
your worship? Yeah.
So, following the same topic, I'm interested in knowing if there's a theory that an individual vote needs to count more based on the individual's views of the party or the party's platform. It seems to me that the debate right now publicly is along partisan lines. So the Liberals are supporting first past the post, the NDP and the Greens are proportional. Would you agree that it would be better that if we do get, if the majority of British Columbians support a change when it gets into the House and we have legislation, do you think the Premier and Andrew Weaver would support an open vote in the House?
I think we have open votes all the time. So I think the question of where would the parties say you can vote yes or no on the legislation, I think most folks, if the referendum went and said yes, people want to change proportionally, there would be an all-party committee struck with the Liberals, with the Greens, with the NDP to go, well, how are we going to actually formulate it? And those would be public meetings around what would be the final details on such a system. And that's, yes, it would come back to the legislature for an open vote. I did want to say that in terms of the question of extremist parties, I was listening to former Premier Christy Clark the other day. Was on a podcast, and the way she argued, she said that currently her party, the BC Liberals, were a coalition of the Conservatives and some members of the Liberal Party, and that the Conservative wing was against LGBT human rights. And so as a party, in order to keep the coalition together, they wouldn't do anything on LGBT human rights. They just wouldn't talk about them in order to please the small wing on the Conservative Party that was opposed to LGBT human rights and doing anything on them. So I would argue that in a first past the post system, extremists still get elected. They just manage to hide in bigger parties and often have influence that we as a public don't see. Some would argue that the new government in Ontario, elected through a first past the post election, certainly many of their members would qualify in terms of some questions around race and even LGBT human rights as well. So you're right, no system is going to be perfect. And in terms of human rights and how we treat each other, that's up to us as individuals and as a community. It's not just, of course, an electoral system.
And Spencer, a couple more questions over there, but one more here real quickly.
As I understand it, the countries where you have like 8-party governments and stuff, as you were mentioning earlier, I mean, those are the parties that have to be responsive to the nation's will. And as I understand it, 8 different countries now that have adopted more representational government have now surpassed Canada in terms of the United Nations ranking on like foreign aid in terms of supporting the developing world. So, but there was an article recently I saw which said that they deliberately put representational government in place in Ireland to make sure that the Protestants and the Catholics were effective, so they could make sure that the both of them kept working for nothing, so they could build ships. So, and that article implied that they did it a long time ago with full knowledge of the effect of that. So from your point of view, like, is it this new, or are there, like to me, the money side is spending a fortune even before the campaign started. Yet when I look at the details of the campaign, I don't even know how it's going to work. I mean, this mail-out thing, it's just very confusing.
Yeah, let's take one more and then try and respond to that.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay,
Have you ever heard about Italy where they have, tell us
It's
about
not
it.
a proportional system that I would support because they have such small, I think
They haven't been able to
0.5%
form a
of the
government
votes
in
to
the
get a
last
party.
zillion years.
Yeah, no, it's not a proportional system that I would in any way support because they have
But we
support
don't
for
know what the
parties that are
proportion, we don't know what your system is, that's the problem.
Yeah, the system, as they've argued, you need a minimum of 5% support in order to get a party into the legislature, a minimum. In Italy, I think it's 0.5. In Israel, I think it's 1%. Definitely not enough. I would personally go for more like 10%, but the system that they're arguing for is around 5. And then of course that could be changed through the all-party committee if the argument is such that that's where people want to go. But in terms of your question, I think what I've heard is the higher in proportional systems, more people vote because more people see that they can actually make change. They're not continually shut out. I've had conservatives in my riding in Vancouver West End saying, well, I want to vote for a conservative party. In my riding, it never has a chance of getting elected. I feel that my vote is wasted. And they've told me that. They say, that they might support me just as an MLA, but they're much more conservative than I am. I would make the argument that you want a conservative party in the BC legislature. We don't have one right now, at least in name. Proportional representation would be a way to get one. Because then you're actually not having to put part of your ideals on hold in order, as Christy Clark said, to keep the coalition together. You get to fight for your values, whatever they may be. And on the left progressive side, if you're in a part of the province like Peace River North, where they vote 75% BC Liberal or whatever the version of the so-called Free Enterprise Party is, your vote would get a chance the 25% of people voting there would get a chance to be heard as well. Through actually having the representation dedicated to the North from that party. So I think all regions would be more likely to have somebody in government as well as out of government.
and I think we have another question.
I just want to change the topic back
Sure.
to the homeless situation, and you mentioned that, you want to help the person or try to help the person that you're stepping over. And I had a thought about that. First of all, I mean, we have apartments, we have the resources to be able to help those kinds of people, and we have. But the outcome of those were that when it went bad, we were left to deal with the situation on our own. And dealing with the tenancy branch is
I've got some thoughts on that.
crazy to try to deal, we're out thousands of dollars to deal with situations that,
One homeless people.
one homeless person. So maybe out of fear, people don't help. I know that's our situation. I don't want to go there because I know if it goes south, I'm left to deal with it on my own. The other thought that I had was maybe there should be some incentive to help people that are in need. Right now, there's a decent, right?
Right, fear and other
Provide-
things can.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
we provide some incentive, maybe the money should go towards providing incentive, encouraging people that can help.
Thank you. It's a great suggestion. I think there's a couple ways. I know some nonprofits now are working to try and provide landlords with some assurance that, yes, this person has had a rough life. Yes, they have been homeless. We will work with you in some cases, they'll go, well, we'll guarantee, damage is done, we'll support that. And so I've seen a lot of situations where it's worked out very well with private landlords.
We've actually worked directly with some of those people, MPA and Fry, and they are very helpful, but ultimately, it's our problem, and they, I don't work with them anymore specifically for that reason.
Yeah, I've been chairing a residential tenancy task force looking at rental issues, and that is one of the big questions is going, well, how do you support a landlord who's in many cases, if they're running a small business, in many cases it works out really well. But when it goes bad, it can go really bad. And so if somebody has no money, where does the money come from?
Right.
Who do you go after for the funds?
It's not just who do you go after, but to try to go after is it's a massive project.
Yeah, oh no, totally. You've got small claims court, you've got to go through
Yeah.
the RTV, you've got to file on time, there's
It
steps.
costs you to file, it's time consuming. I've got somebody, in particular, one situation, that we agreed that they would move out at the end of August. I'm still arguing with the tenancy branch, and it was very straightforward. They paid no rent and they agreed to move out. And I'm still going through the process, and each time it costs me another $100 to file. The process is so incredibly cumbersome that I don't want to deal with those kinds of people or those situations because they're so time consuming and costly. I think that's where the big problem is. If we can address those situations and support landlords in a better way, then you'd have more interest in people helping others.
It's a great point, and I've heard it in many communities, and it's just figuring out the how to.
Balance.
So you're gonna give us some business cards so we can
Yes.
have people call you? And, no, not in a negative way. I think it's really good, Spencer. Good on you. And then Monica can maybe call you one day when you're bored. And she can say, listen, here's my situation. You guys $4,000 behind. Ding, 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 ding. And you're gonna
Well,
say,
if you follow my advice, which is not to just oppose or criticize, but also propose and have
Yeah.
ideas around what to do,
that's yours.
then that's the right way to go
I
about it.
feel sorry for you already.
What have I done? Brian, why did I say yes?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's been really good.
Well, I think that was our longest question period ever, so that's pretty cool. And it's nice to know that Rotarians are well-informed voters, and I encourage everybody to read up about the proposals out there and to go vote for the municipal election coming up. And with that, let's rise and have a toast. A toast to civility. Have a great week. And the Vancouver International Film Festival screening of the Student 54 movie is on this Friday. We had a lot of fun last Friday, so if you want to come with us, let me know.
I'm assuming. Can we do the flag train? I think she's waiting for. Can we build there in front of us?
That is that's the part when she has yours, and maybe she'll get on board or they need to
And that's what Calgary
Excuse me, would you give food no, yeah, she wants to give him again. And John, do you know those? She just needs to I know you're gonna feel sad, okay, but don't worry.
Yeah, I wrote it down. Oh, yeah, that was. You know what the benefits is here?
Oh, I do. Yeah, because the 2 here, 2 there, might go this way.
Spencer, we're not trying to be rude or harming, but I think it's good for you to have real honest, reasonably intelligent feedback.
All the rules and regulations on the table, on this. You vote for us now, yes or no? My vote is obviously no. Because you know why? Because I don't want to.
So I understand that. I didn't set those rules.
Excuse me, I take care, I'll keep talking about you. Okay, you tell John Horgan that Ticketmaster's a little harder. I've seen a change in them, but you talk about corruption. Get out there, kick ass. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Spencer.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, you know what?
Yeah, I know, it's still on the lower level, but right now it's level, right, so it's, yeah, but I mean, I think that now, for the like, we might get maybe 10 of those in the fall ticket, but I don't know, we might get more, because people I know who I was about to do, maybe more the private recovery program, and it's not the ones who just have that. The guy I used to I don't think they would just come for the dance, so I think it would be a, so, yeah.
Just press the board, you know, your seats,
Wait a minute. I wouldn't want to start.
You know where it's a little?
So now I have to wear a party field.
But you would have had, the other tables are smaller than the schools.
No, man, like have a little table like that on bar, but that's more downstairs.
Yeah,
For our parts, there'll be tables.
We have a table, well, we have to next week, get up and just stress the fact that if you're buying your full meal deal, ticket, dinner and dance, there will be seating for you. It's not assigned seating, but there will be seating, you know?
Actually, I
and
said that Carolyn is gonna sign Rotarians tables.
Yeah, but no, I want it, like, if you want me to just sort of be the different
Sure.
sounding
No, go
voice,
ahead now.
I'm happy to do that.
The one weakness is that we tend to all stay together, and so the Rotarians sit over here, and the others sit over there. What you want to ideally do is fix the others in with the
Yeah.
Rotarians, so that they can
About
promote Rotary
Yeah.
and,
And they can talk about what they're doing and.
There's more
Actually,
back
we
and
do-
forth between the big room and the
Yes,
beautiful lounge.
And we do have non-Rotarians who bought $150 tickets, so
Yeah.
we will be, there will be Rotarians at Rotarian tables.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah.
I did that at Presbyterian. We had somebody walk in the door and they got 6 different clerks.
Oh, yeah, so it's not, so it's true, they actually have right now.
Oh,
okay, that's a good idea, we can say that.
And then
The
once
guy is
you-
on the parole, he has
Go to the
business
finance.
kid, and it's only 24-hour guard around that right now. But only is volunteer, it's just all people.
I didn't see the
They're
number.
kind of like, it's bad, make sure they're protected, make sure everyone's secure, make sure they're, but they're also confident.
so they're in Saskatchewan,
They're all over Canada. Oh, yeah. So I thought it would be great because they're a not-for-profit crew, and but it's not just standing guard and protecting a kid, it's also helping them build up confidence and when needed, getting them counseling and stuff like that, so.